My father didn't hesitate. He sent a single icy text that shattered 32 years of history. I disown you. Talk to my lawyer. I remember the light above my Denver kitchen flickering, as if even the room felt the blow. My phone vibrated once, then went still in my hand. No explanation, no hesitation, just exile, delivered in a sentence. I froze when I read that. Have you ever received a message that changed your entire life in a second? Drop a yes in the comments. If you've been there, I want to know I'm not alone in this. The message hung on the screen, a clean, digital eviction notice. It wasn't the heat of an argument or a drunken rant. It was calm. Precise. My father, Richard, had always prided himself on his authority, on being the man who made the hard calls for the local union back in Naperville. But this felt different. This felt like a business decision. I didn't cry. Tears are messy, inefficient. In my line of work, emotion is just bad data, noise that corrupts the audit. I'm a senior compliance officer. I spend my days hunting for irregularities, for the tiny fractures in a company's books that signal a collapse. When a contract is terminated, you don't beg for reinstatement. You secure your assets. You minimize your exposure. You execute the exit protocol. I placed the phone on the counter, face down, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the stark, white walls of my apartment. My family always hated this place. They called it sterile, cold. They didn't understand that for me, emptiness was a luxury. It meant no chaos, no screaming, no sudden emergencies that required my checkbook to fix. I logged into my banking portal. The dashboard loaded, numbers populating the screen in neat, orderly rows. My eyes went straight to the recurring transfers. For 5 years, I had been the silent partner in the Richard and Susan show. The mortgage on the 4-bedroom house in Naperville that they insisted they needed for appearances. $3,800 a month. Every month. Like clockwork. Then there was the Angel Investment Fund for my brother, Brandon. $15,000 transferred quarterly to support his latest tech venture, which usually involved buying vintage sneakers or investing in coins that didn't exist. They called it family support. I knew what it really was. It was protection money. I paused, my finger hovering over the trackpad. For a second, the old fear flared up. The conditioning runs deep. You're the responsible one, Madison. You're the insurance policy. If they fall, you fall. That was the invisible chain I had worn since I was 16. I didn't pay them because I loved them. I paid them because it was the tax I owed for my freedom. It was the fee for keeping their dysfunction 2 states away, for ensuring that their financial ruin never spilled over into my orderly, quiet life. I was a hostage payer, buying my own peace in monthly installments. But the text had changed the terms of service. I disown you. He had broken the contract. And in compliance, when one party breaches, the other is released from all obligations. I clicked on the mortgage transfer. Cancel. A confirmation box popped up, asking if I was sure. I didn't hesitate. Yes. Next, Brandon's fund. Cancel. The country club dues. The car lease payments for Susan's SUV. The emergency medical fund they tapped whenever they wanted a vacation. Cancel, cancel, cancel. It took less than 4 minutes to dismantle the financial infrastructure of their lives. I sat back, watching the status. Inactive banners populate the screen. It was cleaner than I expected. Quieter. They thought my job was boring. Brandon used to laugh at my paperwork life, calling me a corporate drone while he played at being an entrepreneur. They didn't realize that paperwork is what holds the world together, and paperwork is what takes it apart. They mocked the details, the rules, the fine print. But the fine print was the only thing keeping a roof over their heads. And now, the fine print was gone. I closed the laptop. The room was still silent, but the air felt different, heavier, yet somehow easier to breathe. I walked to the window and looked out at the Denver skyline. The mountains were just shadows in the distance. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I wasn't the sister. I was just the compliance officer who had finally closed a compromised account. People ask how it happens, how a smart, capable woman lets herself be bled dry for half a decade. They assume it's weakness, or a desperate need for love. But if you look at the data, it wasn't emotional. It was operational. I have a file, on my secure drive, labeled, the Naperville Ledger. It documents every cent I poured into the black hole of my family's narcissism. To understand the ledger, you have to understand Richard. My father isn't just a man. He's a brand. He's the local union president, a man who built his entire identity on being the guy who could make things happen. He is loud, charismatic, and addicted to the performance of power. But the reality was a balance sheet that never reconciled. He needed the 4-bedroom colonial in the wealthy suburbs to host his union buddies, to prove he was still the king of the hill. But he couldn't afford the crown. So, I paid for it. $3,800 a month to keep the king in his castle. Then there was Susan. My stepmother lists her occupation as real estate agent. But in the 5 years she's held her license, I don't think she's closed a single deal. Her real job is maintaining the illusion. She needed the country club membership, the leased luxury SUV, the boutique lunches. She needed to look like she belonged in a tax bracket she had never actually entered. I covered the lease. I paid the club dues. I categorized it under public relations because, if Susan looked successful, she wouldn't call me crying at 2 a.m. And Brandon, my brother, the entrepreneur. Brandon has founded 4 companies in the last 6 years. First, it was a dropshipping business that ended with a garage full of unsellable phone cases. Then it was vintage sneaker reselling. Most recently, it was crypto. He called it liquidity provision. I called it gambling. Every quarter, he'd come to me with a pitch deck and a desperate need for $15,000 to bridge the gap. And every quarter, I wired the funds. Why? Because I was the silent equity partner in a failing conglomerate. I invested $250,000 over 5 years. $250,000. I didn't do it because I believed in them. I did it because I was terrified of the alternative. If Richard lost the house, if Susan lost the car, if Brandon went bankrupt, the chaos would spill over. They would show up at my door. Their creditors would start looking for next of kin. My credit score, my pristine reputation in the compliance world, it was all tied to the family name. I paid them to stay away. It wasn't generosity. It was hush money. But looking at the total sum tonight, the logic collapsed. $250,000 to buy silence from people who just fired me via text message. I had treated them like a bad asset class, hoping the market would turn, hoping that eventually, they would become solvent. But, bad debt is just bad debt. You can't fix a systemic failure with more capital. Richard thought he was cutting off a daughter. He didn't realize he was defaulting on his primary investor. And in my world, when you default, the bank doesn't just stop lending. The bank comes for collateral. 48 hours. That's exactly how long it takes for a check to bounce, and a digital notification to cross 2 state lines. The first tremors hit Chicago on a Tuesday morning. I was in my office, reviewing a risk assessment for a client, when my personal phone lit up. It was Susan. I let it ring. She called again immediately. Then a text. Madison. There's been a mistake. The card was declined at the club. Fix this. I stared at the message. Fix this. Not a question, not a request, an order. She genuinely believed it was a clerical error. A glitch in the system she felt entitled to. She didn't know the system had been unplugged. An hour later, Brandon's number popped up. He didn't call, he sent a voice note. I put my AirPods in and pressed play. His voice was breathless, panicked. Maddie, what the hell? My liquidity pool transfer failed. I have investors waiting. You're sabotaging my launch. Call the bank, now. I didn't reply. I simply archived the message into a new folder labeled Evidence. By noon, the heavy artillery arrived. Richard called. He didn't leave a voicemail at first. He just kept calling, over and over, a relentless assault on my peace. Finally, a notification appeared. Voicemail, Richard. I played it on speaker, in the quiet of my office. His voice was a low rumble, shaking with rage. I don't know what game you're playing, girl, but you stealing my money? That's a line you don't cross. You think you can cut me off? I made you. That money is mine. You fix this by end of day, or I'm coming out there. stealing his money. The delusion was breathtaking. In their minds, my salary wasn't mine. My success wasn't mine. It was a family resource they had a birthright to harvest. They truly believed that because I was the daughter, the quiet, boring compliance officer, my purpose was to serve the real visionaries of the family. They saw my bank account as an extension of their own ego. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the blinking cursor on my screen. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They weren't asking why. They were demanding restoration. They wanted the status quo back. They wanted the golden goose to get back in her cage and keep laying eggs. But they had made a critical error. They assumed I was withholding funds to be petty. They assumed this was a temper tantrum. They didn't realize I wasn't emotional. I was insolvent. Or rather, they were insolvent. I didn't block them. I needed to see the escalation. I needed the data points. Every threat, every demand, every scream into the digital void was proof. It was validation that I had made the right call. The silence from my end was driving them insane because it forced them to sit in the one place they had avoided for 5 years, reality. And the reality was, without my transfer, the mortgage was already late. Without my investment, Brandon's crypto wallet was empty. Without my dues, Susan was just a woman with a maxed-out credit card standing at a register she couldn't pay. The panic wasn't about missing me. It was about the sudden, terrifying realization that they were broke. I watched the notifications stack up like pending lawsuits. Richard's threats had shifted from, "I disown you," to, "I'm calling the police" within 4 hours. It was erratic, desperate. But amidst the noise, one detail caught my eye. Richard mentioned my money. Not your support, but my money. It was a slip, a linguistic tell. I stopped looking at my phone and started looking at myself. I needed to know my exposure. In my job, you don't trust, you verify. I logged into the credit monitoring service I recommended to clients but rarely checked for myself. I expected to see a clean report, high score, low utilization, boringly perfect. Instead, I saw a map of a war zone. 3 credit cards I didn't recognize. A business loan for Naperville Consulting LLC opened 18 months ago. A line of credit attached to a union pension fund guarantee. All in my name. All co-signed with a signature that looked like mine, but tighter, sharper. My breath hitched. This wasn't charity theft. This wasn't just mooching. This was identity theft. Federal identity theft. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used since grad school. "Hello?" A voice answered, distracted. "David, it's Madison. I need a forensic audit. Personal. Emergency." David didn't ask questions. He was the best forensic accountant in the Midwest. I sent him the raw data from my credit report and the banking history I had access to. While he worked, I sat in the silence of my apartment, connecting the dots. Richard hadn't just been taking my handouts. He had been using my pristine credit, my professional standing as a compliance officer, to secure loans he could never qualify for. He was leveraging my identity to float the union's pension fund, a fund he had likely drained to cover his gambling debts. That's where the money went. The mortgage, the lifestyle, Brandon's investments, it was all a shell game to hide the fact that he was embezzling from his own union members. And then the final piece clicked. The Disown text. It wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. He knew the IRS was auditing the union. He knew the house of cards was about to fall. By disowning me, by creating a paper trail of estrangement, he was setting the stage. When the feds came knocking, he would claim he was just a simple union man, and that his high-flying daughter in Denver, the compliance officer, had been managing the finances. He was going to say, "I did it." He wasn't cutting me off. He was framing me. My phone buzzed. "David." "Madison. I'm looking at this. The signatures are good, but the timestamps are wrong. These loans were originated from an IP address in Naperville. If you report this now, you're a victim. If you wait, you're an accomplice." I thanked him and hung up. I looked at the disown text one last time. "Talk to my lawyer," he had said. "Be careful what you wish for, Dad." I wasn't going to call a lawyer. I was going to call the IRS. I spent the next 6 hours on the phone, escalating my case through the Whistleblower hotline. I provided the IP addresses, the unauthorized accounts, the timeline. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I had a case number, and a provisional immunity agreement. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the witness. And I was about to deliver the most devastating audit report of my career. I flew to Chicago on a red-eye, carrying nothing but my laptop bag and a single green file folder. I didn't tell them I was coming. Surprise audits are always the most effective. When I pulled up to the Naperville house in my rental car, the driveway was full. Brandon's leased Tesla was there. Susan's SUV. They were all home, probably strategizing their next move, probably figuring out how to force me back into line. I walked up the driveway, the same path I had shoveled snow from as a teenager, while Brandon played video games inside. The house looked smaller than I remembered. It looked tired. The paint was peeling slightly around the trim. The lawn was overgrown. Without my monthly infusion of cash, the cracks were already showing. I didn't knock. I used the key I still had, the one Richard hadn't bothered to take back, because he assumed I'd never have the guts to use it. I walked into the living room. They were all there. Richard sat in his recliner, a glass of scotch in his hand at 10 in the morning. Susan was pacing by the window. Brandon was on the sofa, scrolling on his phone. They froze when they saw me. "Madison?" Susan gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Richard stood up slowly, a smug smile spreading across his face. Well, look who came crawling back. I knew you'd come to your senses." He genuinely believed I was there to apologize. He thought I was there to write a check. "Sit down, Dad," I said. My voice was calm, steady. It didn't shake. "Don't tell me what to do in my house," he snapped, the bluster returning instantly. "You owe us an explanation, you owe us an apology, and you owe us—" I said sit down. It wasn't a request, it was a command, and for the first time in his life, Richard hesitated. He saw something in my face he hadn't seen before. He sat. I walked to the coffee table and placed the green file in the center. I didn't open it, I just let it sit there, a silent weight in the room. "I'm not here to apologize," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "And I'm not here to pay the mortgage. I'm here to tell you that your timeline has moved up." "What timeline?" Brandon scoffed. "If you're not here to pay, then get out. We don't need your drama." "You don't need my drama," I agreed. "But you might need a lawyer, a real one, because at 9 o'clock this morning, I signed a whistleblower immunity agreement with the IRS. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "Immunity?" Richard's voice was a whisper. "For what?" "For the $3 million in fraudulent loans you took out against the union pension fund," I said, using my name, using my credentials, using a forged signature that was good, Dad, but not good enough. Susan let out a strangled sound. Brandon dropped his phone. Richard turned a shade of gray I had never seen on a living human. You went to the feds? You ratted out your own father?" "You stole my identity, Richard," I corrected him. "You framed me. You set me up to take the fall for your gambling debts. Did you really think I wouldn't check my own credit report? Did you think I was that stupid?" I watched him then. Really watched him. For years, I had been terrified of this man. I had seen him as a titan, a force of nature, who could destroy me with a word. But looking at him now, slumped in his chair, glass shaking in his hand, I realized it was all a costume. The power, the authority, the big man persona, it was all rented. And the rent was past due. Without my money, without his lies, he was just a sad, frightened old man who had bet everything on a losing hand. The fear evaporated. It just vanished. "You can't prove anything," he stammered. But the conviction was gone. "I don't have to," I said. "The forensic audit is already done. The IP addresses are logged. The paper trail leads straight to this house, straight to that laptop on your desk." I checked my watch. "The FBI agents are parking down the street. They gave me 10 minutes to get my personal effects out of the house before they execute the search warrant. You have about—" I looked at my watch again. 3 minutes left. The chaos was instant. Susan started screaming at Richard. "You said it was safe! You said she'd never know!" Brandon scrambled off the couch, trying to shove his laptop into a backpack. "I didn't know!" he yelled. "I just spent the money! I didn't know where it came from. They turned on each other like rats in a sinking ship. The perfect family disintegrated in seconds. There was no loyalty, no love, just panic and blame. I stood there in the center of the storm, perfectly still. I watched them scream, I watched them crumble, and I felt absolutely nothing but peace. I walked out of the house while Susan was still screaming. The sound faded quickly as the heavy front door clicked shut behind me. Down the street, 2 unmarked sedans pulled up to the curb. Men in suits stepped out, adjusting their jackets. The cavalry had arrived. I got into my rental car and started the engine. I didn't wait to see them go in. I didn't need to see the handcuffs or the tears. The audit was complete. The file was closed. I drove back to O'Hare in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of the tires on the highway. My phone was buzzing in my bag, probably Brandon trying to beg for a transfer, or Susan threatening to sue me, but I didn't check it. I would change my number when I got back to Denver. When I landed, it was late. The city lights were a grid of gold against the black mountains. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. It was quiet, it was sterile. It was perfect. I walked to the balcony and looked out at the skyline. For years, I had thought this silence was a punishment. I thought it meant I was alone. But standing there, breathing the cold, thin air, I realized it wasn't emptiness. It was solvency. My bank account was mine. My credit was mine. My life was mine. I didn't burn them down out of spite. I didn't ruin them because I hated them. I simply stopped paying for their lies. I let the truth do its work. And the truth was, they had built a castle on sand, and I had been the only thing holding back the tide. When I stepped away, gravity did the rest. I thought about the money I would save. $3,800 a month, $15,000 a quarter. It added up. I wouldn't spend it on vacations or clothes. I had already filed the paperwork for a non-profit consultancy. I was going to help women detect financial coercion. I was going to teach them how to read credit reports, how to spot identity theft, how to audit their own lives before it was too late. I would turn the trauma into a tool. I would be the shield for someone else that no one had been for me. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the potted plant on my balcony. I took a deep breath. It was over. The ledger was balanced. And, for the first time in 32 years, I was free. I learned that the most expensive thing you can buy is a relationship that costs you your peace. If you're holding up the sky for someone who wouldn't catch you if you fell, maybe it's time to let go. Share this story if you believe in breaking the cycle.